Under the starry night, the great Bennett Castle stood to guard the plain that it was built on. Everything in this territory belonged to the Knight of Bennett. The king granted it to him. This territory was located at the southmost point of the Duchy of Carmel, right at the crossing border of the earth-dividing mountain range. It was a location far away from conflict, and it served as a crucial granary to the Duchy of Carmel. It was summertime now, and the crops were plentiful. Every time the chilling night breeze came by, the whole field danced in uniform to signify the prosperity of this land. A boy who looked to be around 12 was swinging a sword about the size of his body. As if it wasn't heavy enough for him, this boy was also wearing a steel armor that was clearly oversized for him. He was about 150 centimeters tall, so the armor looked more like a belt as it was covered around him. As young as he was, this boy took his training seriously. The look on his face suggested that training was something sacred to him. Every time he swung his sword, he shouted with as much vigor in his lungs as he could. There were reasons for that. 1. To breathe in as much air as he could, and 2. To squeeze out all the strength in his muscles. This boy was focused. His black hair was completely drenched in sweat, and those purple eyes of his were glowing with youth-like passion. Well, they were until he heard the sound of a horse coming his way. "Look what I've brought to you, Abel," a young man of 18 called out as he jumped down from his horse. He had blonde hair, thick brows, a tall, edgy nose, and eyes that were as blue as the sky. His whole body was covered in leather armor, and the boots he was wearing were made especially for riding. "Welcome back, big brother," Abel welcomed his brother back. Unlike most children, he wasn't particularly curious about what the gift was. Manners, for him, was something that came before his own personal interests. As Abel's older brother, Zach was already used to seeing Abel like this. A year ago, Abel was severely injured after falling off his horse. He became much more mature after that. It was hard to get used to at first, but 1 year was more than enough to adjust to this sudden change of personality. For the sake of clarification, both of these young men were sons of the Knight of Bennett. The older one was Zach, a rank 4 novice knight who just got back from Fort Lee, a town. The younger one, who had been busy with his training, was Abel. It had only been 2 months since he began his training as a novice knight. As the oldest heir to the Knight of Bennett, everything his father owned would be passed down to him after he became a knight. He would have full ownership of the Bennett Castle and the estate it was built on. Abel, sadly, was not blessed with such privileges. He had to rely solely on himself if he was to make a living. As unfair as the rules might seem, Abel had a good relationship with Zach. Every time Zach went to town, he would always spend a little money that he had to buy presents for Abel. He was a good brother. He strived to make Abel happy. Abel, on the other hand, was considerate enough to not ask for any new training equipment from his father. Although the family's estate was about 50 kilometers in radius, there wasn't much income apart from what they used to buy food with. Worse yet, only 500 gold coins were left after they've paid for the taxes and day-to-day expenses. It was just enough to pay for the maintenance of Bennett Castle. If you were to then take out the tuition fee of Zach's night training, this family practically had no savings at all. The package Zach had for Abel was a long box. To show how much love that was put in this gift, Zach had it wrapped around in some very colorful paper. "What a beautiful dagger this is," Abel exclaimed as he waved his gift around. This dagger was made with fine steel, something much heavier than what you use to make a regular steel dagger. Normally, a dagger like this would cost a lot more than a normal one. "Glad to see you like it. Lucky for me, the guy selling it didn't know how much it was worth. He sold it to me for 30% off the price of a regular dagger, so I took it." "Glad to see you like it," Zach meant it when he said that. It had been a while since he saw his little brother smiling like a kid, and nothing was more precious than the expression Abel was showing just now. You can keep training if you want. I'll go back home now, Zack said as he got back on his horse. He wasn't planning on interrupting with Abel's training, even if he was going to keep using the only steel armor that they've had. It was Zack during the day and Abel during the night. It's something that they've agreed between themselves. A novice knight's training consisted mainly of the basics. One must keep practicing his sword techniques until he could effectively condense all the strength that could be exerted. In turn, a special power, namely one's chi, would start forming inside his body as a reward to the efforts that were given. The chi would then slowly gathered up and formed a meridian, and the total number of these meridians would represent one's total ranks. Having a total of 1 meridian would signify that you're a rank 1 novice. After 5 meridians were in place, they would condense themselves again to form a core. A knight with a core would be considered a proper knight. They could use the combat chi in fights, and they could use the combat chi to perform various fighting skills. In other words, combat chi was an effective asset to boost one's fighting capability. After millennia of research, it was found that the most effective way to forming one's meridian was to have him wear heavy armor during his training. For this very reason, it became mandatory for knight families to have at least 1 steel armor set inside their homes. In order to be called a knight, one must have armor that he could engage in his training with. During times of conflict, he would also need it to provide for minimal protection. By decreasing or increasing the number of plates, the same armor could be shared even if the wielders were in different ranks. That being said, one did not have to own an armor to be called a knight. If he was to be seen wearing an armor, even if it wasn't his on a horse, he would be instantly recognized as a knight, no matter how low his rank was. 97.98.99.10 Abel chanted as he made his final swing, then collapsed right on the grass field below him. His purple eyes were looking straight at the sky above him. Which of these stars was my original home? He asked himself. Unbeknownst to others, the original Abel fell off his horse and died about 1 year ago. His corpse was replaced by another soul that came from planet Earth, and unlike the original Abel, who was only about 10 years old, the new Abel was about 30 years old in his actual age. Despite having behaved as carefully as he could, it was hard for the new Abel not to have others suspect him for his change of personality. Fortunately for him, however, everyone just thought that it was the aftermath of falling off a horse. This particular Abel had another name back home. The name he had on planet Earth was Diablo. He was an experienced bodybuilding trainer who was always busy with his work. One night, at about 10 o'clock at night, he came back to his apartment whilst not feeling so good about himself. Because of this, he decided to open up his laptop and open up Diablo 2, one of the few games he still had in reserve. He opened up his software, played Diablo 2 for a bit, and found that the quantity of his Tome of Town portal was 0. He had the bad habit of forgetting to buy his Scroll of Town portal, so he opened up his hacking software and modified his items for a bit. He hacked the game so that the quantity of his Scroll of Town portal would regenerate themselves once every few minutes. Diablo was having a time of his life, but a bolt of lightning struck and hit him right when he was inside his home. The lightning conductor did absolutely nothing. The lightning didn't even bend as it was dropped straight down at him. And that's pretty much it. After he regained consciousness, Diablo found himself to be the second son of the Knight of Bennett. Weirdly enough, though, his name was still Diablo Abel. Whilst trying to get rid of the thoughts in his head, Abel stood up and headed back towards Bennett Castle. He was feeling quite good about himself on that day. If things went well for him, there was a chance that he would become a rank 1 novice knight on the same night. After coming back home, Abel decided to do something first before having dinner. There was still about half an hour before mealtime, so he was thinking about giving some care to his steel armor. Abel took cleaning very seriously. He never missed a spot when he was wiping the sweat off his steel armor and furnishing it with oil. It was a custom for knights to take care of their armor. Whether it was Abel, Zach, or even the Knight of Bennett himself, they had to maintain their armor in a way that they could pass it down to the next generation. After Abel was done with the armor, it was his giant sword that came next. It was relatively easy to clean it, mainly because of how simple its design was. Apart from the blade and the handle, there was no decoration or ornament whatsoever. Whoever made this weapon had only two considerations in mind: simplicity and practicality. After finishing his daily maintenance, Abel took a shower and joined his family in the dining room. As he came in, he found that his father, mother and older brother were already on the seats. The Knight of Bennett was wearing a plain white calico as he sat at the dinner table. As usual, he had a serious look on his face. Abel never saw him showing much emotion at all. Actually, never was an overstatement. The last time he saw any expression from the Knight of Bennett was about a year ago when he had just woken up from his coma. He could never forget the joy on his father's face as he was brought into this world. Abel's mother, Nora, was a kind woman. She was the one who fed Abel every time he was recovering from his injuries. If anything, she was the reason why Abel acknowledged being a part of this family. Abel never got used to saying his grace before a meal. He had been an atheist for all 30 years of his previous life. It was only until recently that he had come to pray to the holy light, which almost everyone in this world would devote their worship to. Nobody talked during mealtime. The knights were the lowliest among royalty, but this family still adhered to their mannerisms even when alone. For the dinner tonight, it was a large piece of beef divided into 4. Father and Zach received a larger portion, whereas Mother and Abel were supposed to receive much less. Since food intake was needed to increase the supply of a knight's chi, there was simply no way to divide the food between everyone equally. But still, even as a bodybuilding trainer, Abel had never eaten so much beef during his time on Earth. There was about a pound of beef on his plate, and he was only 12 years old. There was also some porridge for him. It wasn't like he couldn't finish his food, though. He finished eating all of it in just a few minutes. "Here, have some more," a gentle voice said. It was Abel's mother, Nora. She just gave Abel more than half of her beef. The Knight of Bennett threw a quick look towards Abe, but he didn't say anything to him. Instead, he just kept on eating. His hands were somewhat stiff. However, while he was trying to slice the meat with his knife, there was a slight cladding noise when his knife made contact with the plate, something very unusual for the master of this house. Zach took notice of it but was quickly hushed when the Knight of Bennett threw a glare at him. "Thank you, Mother," Abel thanked Nora as he accepted a fraction of his mother's meal. Since this was the way of Nora showing her love, the right thing to do here was to simply accept it. As a part of the family routine, the Knight of Bennett had Zach accompany him for some personal training after dinner. Abel, on the other hand, wasn't allowed to attend until he was a rank 1 novice knight, which he might just become before tomorrow arrives. Whilst wasting no time to become a rank 1 novice knight, Abel headed straight back to his room for a night's breathing session. He had a full meal just then, and the amount of chi he accumulated throughout the day were very much sufficient for his training to make progress. A knight's breathing techniques was the most crucial part of his skill sets. Whether it was passed down from the family or learned at a knight's academia, every knight had their own special breathing techniques. If a knight was to make a lot of contributions on the battlefield, he could transfer his war efforts in exchange for improvements in his breathing techniques. After sitting himself on a rugged floor, Abel calmed his mind to commence his breathing session. The pace at which he inhaled the air went from slow to fast, and his stomach gradually became filled like a drum. He exhaled a streak of white, misty essence which vanished into the air like an arrow that's just been fired. The food in his stomach was quickly being digested as he was doing this. After breathing for about 20 times in a row, the chi Abel acquired during the day was now passing through the food he ingested, and it slowly started to form into a single meridian channel. This meridian channel was quite unstable at first, but just when Abel thought that he had failed himself again, a power suddenly emerged from his meridian all the way across his body. He wasn't sure quite what it was, but both his body and his mind were like he had just gotten out of bed this morning. He had finally become a rank 1 novice knight. A year ago, after seeing his father slicing a large trunk of a tree, he had come to realize the existence of supernatural forces in this new world. Unlike his home back on planet Earth, strength was very much crucial for survival here. When Abel asked his father to train him to become a knight, he was given a detailed explanation of the family's circumstances in response. From what the Knight of Bennett told him, a second son should only train himself without interfering with the progress of the eldest son. Zack was the priority of the family, basically. All the resources should be given to him first, and Abel would only have what was spared. That being said, though, he would still have access to learning the Bennett family's ways of being a knight. Despite his unfortunate circumstances, Abel still learned quite a lot under his father. For the several months that he had recovered from his injuries, he was taught the ways of tending to horses, giving maintenance to his weapons, as well as the handling of a bow and arrow. He was also taught the proper etiquette of a knight, and he was taught many other things he had to prepare for before commencing his official knight training, which only happened at about 2 months ago. Whilst still cheering for the progress he made just then, Abel noticed that the meridian in his right arm was quickly losing its presence. Good thing that it stopped after a few seconds, though. If this kept on going, Abel would lose all his progress without being able to do anything about it. The breathing session tonight didn't result in complete failure. Abel lost some chi at the end, but he could easily regain them after a day or two of training. He was not going to lose his rank as an amateur knight. But still, having chi drained out of him was a somewhat bizarre phenomenon. To satisfy his curiosity, Abel pulled back his right sleeve and found a light shadow on his arm. It was kind of difficult to notice it at first sight. Abel took a long, close look at this mysterious shadow. He wasn't sure why, but it sure did look kind of familiar to him. It's a Horadric cube. Abel jumped out of the ground after he figured it out. This thing was a Horadric cube, there was no doubt about it. As an avid player of Diablo 2 for so many years, he would have never mistaken an important item like this one. It followed me to this world. Abel walked around his room in excitement. There was not a thing that he was familiar with in this world, and seeing a Horadric cube here was like finding a water bottle in the middle of a desert. From what it looked like, the Horadric cube had probably always been there. The reason it hadn't appeared before was because there wasn't any energy to activate it. Since Abel became a rank 1 novice knight tonight, some of the chi he lost just then probably went inside the cube. The Horadric cube was just floating on his right arm. Abel touched it with his finger, and his vision was suddenly filled with a window showing his inventory slot. There were 12 slots in total, and 2 of them were occupied by a single blue book. It was the Tome of Town portal. Abel recognized it on the spot. It was the same copy as the one he modified before being struck by lightning. From what he could see inside his head, the quantity of this Tome of Town portal would regenerate itself once every few minutes. I'll take this tome out of the cube, Abel thought, and the Tome of Town portal quickly appeared inside his hand. It was quite a big book, almost as big as a magazine you would find on Earth. Its opaque blue cover was decorated with dark golden fringes, which would give off an occasional spark to signify how valuable this item was. Can I go home if I use this Tome of Town portal? Abel's heart started beating very fast. He wanted to see his real parents. He wanted to get a taste of his mother's cooking, and he wanted to get a smell of his hometown. For the entire year that he was in this world, Abel had never been so homesick until just now. After slowly opening up the Tome of Town portal, 20 different scrolls of Town portal appeared. These scrolls were written on white wool sheets and were strapped in blue ribbons. All Abel needed to do to open up a portal was to pull the ribbons away. Abel tried placing his hand on one of the scrolls, but for some reason, his finger bounced off whilst he was trying to make contact with it. After trying again with a bit more force, he was able to successfully take the ribbon out of the scroll. To his dismay, no portal appeared in front of him. It was a fireball that had emerged instead. Abel instantly threw it out of his hand the moment he saw it, which made a burn hole on the rug that he was standing on. It was irritating, of course, but at least it didn't burn the entire house down. Why didn't it work? Why did fireballs come out? Abel tried a few times more, but the results were always the same. Every time he tried opening up the scroll of town portal, flames would come out and incinerate its content into a pile of ashes. Abel cried after that. He cried for a while, then went to sleep as he got tired of crying. Whilst Abel was asleep, a shed of moonlight shined through the window and lit upon his face. The tears on his cheeks were gradually blown away by the night breeze coming in, which made him feel kind of cold even in his bed sheets. "Bye-bye, Mama," a young, vulnerable voice called out in the night. It was the desperate call of a son to his parents. No one would understand it, though, as it was spoken in a language that belonged not to this world. It was Mandarin. The language was Mandarin, the common tongue that used back at home. It was the language that a son would speak in when he was far away from home. Under the bright dawn light that shone across the plain, the Bennett Castle once again revealed its grandiosity for the whole world to see. Compared to other castles owned by knights of the same rank, the Bennett Castle was actually a much more extravagant piece of architecture. It was, in a way, what you'd call a work of an era. It took about 10 years for the first Bennett lord to finish constructing it. And if it wasn't for the diligent maintenance of those who came after him, there wouldn't be such a magnificent landmark standing here to this day. Due to the incompetence of its successors over the last few generations, the Bennett family was demoted from one of the most prestige lords in the kingdom to just a family of knights. This was why the Bennets were always so ashamed when they talked about the past. As the current ruler of the house, the Knight of Bennett was very regretful to have accomplished so little during the war. He fought bravely and persistently against the orcs, but the achievements he made were not sufficient to change his family's status. This was why he was so keen on educating his children. Zack, especially. If Zack could become a knight before the age of 30, the Bennett bloodline would have no concerns with being cut off. After that, it was up to Zack's ability to decide his own future. Abel, though, was not placed with such responsibility. If he never volunteered to become a knight, the Knight of Bennett was going to have someone teach him mathematics. Abel was supposed to find an office job in town when he got older. The Knight of Bennett was very worried about his younger son's future. Abel was not going to have his own castle. He was not going to have his own war horse. He wasn't even going to have his own armor. Once Abel became older, he would become a wandering knight, and wandering knights were not recognized by the nobles in this country. He would have to spend a great deal of his life just to be able to afford the basic gear. If he could find a stable living before the age of 40, that would be considered more than lucky. "You ranked up?" the Knight of Bennett asked Abel. Abel took about 2 months to become a rank 1 novice knight. The same process took his father 4 months, and his brother 4.5 months. Abel wasn't given the same amount of resources. The attention he received was nowhere near the same as other men, but raw talent alone gave him an advantage at the very start. "Yes, father, I became a rank 1 novice knight last night," Abel replied, and Zack quickly ran over to give him a hug. "You're a genius, brother, my most dear brother." Zack spun his little brother around. He would have liked to compliment him a bit more, but Abel didn't seem to like being waved around like a ragdoll. "You're a genius," Zack said once more as he put Abel back to the ground. Shame, shame. The Knight of Bennett watched with a complex look on his face. He was happy, but kind of sad at the same time. If Abel was his oldest son, he would probably make more income than Zack would as a knight. That being said, Zack's training was already in progress. The Bennett family did not have any money to spare. Abel got his Horadric cube yesterday. He couldn't use the scroll of town portal in it, but it was always nice to possess an item this valuable. In fact, after he woke up this morning, all he was thinking about was the formula he used to craft the cube. Even though there weren't a lot of formulas that he could use now, he might find something useful in town. "Father, I want to go to Fort Lee today," Abel requested. As usual, he was very direct to make this request. He wasn't used to talking this way before, but knights were supposed to be assertive in the speech. The Knight of Bennett nodded, "Sure. You just became a knight last night. It's better if you take a day off from your training today." "I'll help you get a horse," Zack said, then ran off to the stable. He got an inferior horse for Abel. After helping Abel to get on it, he even snuck a gold coin inside his pocket. The Knight of Bennett saw it, of course, but he didn't point it out. He was very happy to see it, though. After all, a brotherly bond was a rare thing to find from those of noble birth. Every horse that was not a war horse was considered to be what was called an inferior horse. A war horse would be fed wheat and beans. Quality feeds which would have cost at least 10 gold coins every month. Without receiving this kind of treatment, a war horse would quickly lose its speed and become a regular inferior horse. The horse Abel was riding was an inferior horse. It was a 2-year-old pony, but it was born from a war horse that belonged to the Bennett family. If the Bennett family could afford to give it the proper nutrition, there wouldn't be a problem to raise it as a war horse. While Abel was riding on his inferior pony, he had his bodyguard, Norman, following him at his back. Norman was wearing a full set of leather armor. He was carrying a long sword on his back, but he didn't have a horse with him. Since the horse his master was riding was a pony, he had no problem following it with just his 2 legs. Norman was a retired soldier who came back from war with the Knight of Bennett. As an underling to the Knight of Bennett, he lived with the rest of the family in the Bennett castle. In a way, it was the way of a servant showing his gratitude and loyalty to his lord. Norman was a very skilled swordsman. He became a rank 6 warrior after being trained directly under the Knight of Bennett. He didn't possess any kind of special techniques, but his swordsmanship alone was enough to make him a trustworthy bodyguard of Abel. "Hold on for a second, young master." Norman drew a sword from his back and scanned the trees on the side of the road. It would take about half an hour to go from here to Bennett Castle. It was also half an hour away from Fort Lee. If something was to happen to Abel, it was virtually impossible to call for backups. "What did you find?" Abel pulled the rein on his pony, then drew his new dagger from his waist pocket. While Abel was a lot taller than Norman on a horse, he couldn't see anything that was in the trees. What he could hear, though, was a loud growling from over the distance. That's when the shadow appeared. Abel could see it now. It was a shadow panther, and it was leaping straight for the pony's neck. The pony wasn't afraid in the least, however. As the offspring of a mare that survived the war, it was more than ready to take on a defensive stance. Snap! Within less than a second, it quickly jumped back and dodged the deadly bite of the shadow panther. The panther missed and was immediately punished by Norman and his long sword. Usually, a shadow panther wouldn't appear during the daytime. It liked being in the dark, and it liked ambushing its prey while hiding at the side of the road. An encounter like this was rather unusual, in a way. This panther must have been starving to go so far away out of the forest. Norman already had his sword ready. The shadow panther, though, was by no means an ordinary feline. As ineffective as its bites were against Norman's blade, it still managed to dodge every single one of his attacks. Abel jumped down from his horse to join the fight. The Shadow Panther didn't attend to him. Judging from past experience, the larger human was the only thing that was stopping it from getting a full meal. The Shadow Panther was right. Well, partly, at least. Abel didn't make a direct approach. Instead, he just circled around in the distance for an opportunity to strike. He didn't want to be a nuisance to Norman. It wasn't like he could do much harm if he just charged forward, either. It took a while for Norman to make his first contact. He was aiming for the Shadow Panther's neck, but it was fast enough to make the blade hit its back instead. Worse yet, the sly beast exploited this chance for a counterattack. While Norman was off guard, it used its tail for a surprise whip attack at one of his legs. Norman was suddenly at a disadvantage. Pain started showing on his face, and his feet were moving slow as he tried to readjust his position. While watching from the side, Abel knew he couldn't wait any longer. Abel quickly drew a long, deep breath. He wanted to concentrate all his chi into one powerful attack. If he could release it towards the Shadow Panther, this should be over in an instant. He had to be very careful, though. The technique he was using was meant for novice knights to train themselves to exhaustion. If he was to miss and make another attempt, he would probably end up destroying his meridian to the point of no recovery. In a blink of an eye, the Shadow Panther leaped towards Norman for a finishing strike. Since there was a momentary pause as it stayed in midair, Abel took the chance and took his bet. He ran towards the panther from its back, his dagger pointing forward in his hands. A painful growl from the Shadow Panther. It was aware of Abel's presence the entire time, but the injury Norman inflicted still had an effect in delaying its movements. It was a close call, essentially. If Abel didn't step in, the outcome would be very different now. Having dug his dagger inside the Shadow Panther, Abel quickly let go of his grip and took a few steps back. The panther, on the other hand, started violently jerking its body as it laid on the ground. It didn't have the energy to keep up the fight, but the bloodlust would just never leave its conscience. It took a while for the Shadow Panther to die. The more that it growled at Abel and Norman, the weaker its voice slowly started to become. Once it stopped making any noise, that's also when it stopped moving at all. Abel wanted to make sure that the panther was dead, but Norman pulled him back when he took a step forward. "Be careful," he said, as he threw the sheath of his sword towards the Shadow Panther. Just when Abel thought that the Shadow Panther was dead, it suddenly clashed away the sheath with its claws. Even on the brink of death, its reflexes were still much faster than the vast majority of humans. Now that the Shadow Panther was certainly dead, Norman still wouldn't let Abel go check on it. Instead, he went ahead to pick up the sheath that he threw. "Young master," he pointed towards the claw marking on his sheath as he picked it up. "As you can see, most beasts prefer killing their prey instantly." Norman picked up the Shadow Panther's corpse on the ground. Then, with a smile on his face, he removed the dagger from its backside and returned it back to Abel. "How would you like to deal with this, sir?" Norman inquired. "This is your prize, after all." "Let's carry it and sell it in town," Abel ordered as he looked towards the injury on Norman's leg. "Take the horse from here on. Take the panther with you as well." Despite his role as a humble servant, Norman didn't hesitate to take his young master's horse. He would give his life away if it was for the Bennett family, but none of that was contradictory to what he was doing here. Right now, he was an injured man. The most he could do for Abel was to not be a liability. Since there was only one horse available, the fastest way to travel was to have him stop walking on his two legs. Fort Lee. It was supposed to be just the name of an old fort, but people started building a town around it and made it into a densely populated town. Right now, the old Fort Lee was used as a residence for Lord Rex, who was the current mayor of this town. It was about noon when Abel and Norman arrived at Fort Lee. After a brief discussion between themselves, the two decided to go to the church for some treatment first. For the priest to perform a healing for light injury on Norman's leg, they spent a total of 10 silver coins. Something stood out Abel while they were walking out of the sanctuary building. As it turned out, holding a church was actually a very profitable business. 10 silver coins were enough to feed a family for a month, but a priest could ask for the same amount for performing one divine act. Actually, just look at how tall the church was built. Under Norman's guide, Abel came to a leather store on the eastern side of town. It was, frankly, the right place to sell the shadow panther they killed. The store manager was shocked when the two brought the animal in. It was hard to bring down a dangerous predator without doing too much damage to its body. That was exactly what Abel and Norman did, though. Apart from the long streak of the wound on its backside, every other part of the panther was left untouched. That being said, the shopkeeper was more than happy to buy it for 10 gold coins. While Norman seemed pretty content with this deal, Abel just nodded with him. He didn't know how the leather market was like, but the 10 gold coins sounded like quite a good sum. 10 gold coins, along with the 1 coin he got from Zack and the other 5 he had in saving, Abel had a total of 16 gold coins. Just like in the previous world, having gold meant great purchasing power. This meant that Abel wasn't exactly penniless now. Just to be clear, he didn't come to Fort Lee for a day off. He came here to do some shopping. Some of which he had sent Norman to retrieve, and some of which he must buy without letting others know. Which was why he decided to head to the center of Fort Lee. After sending Norman away, Abel came to the Fort Lee shopping center, which was a large shopping place marked with a logo of the old fort. It was about noontime here, so there wasn't a lot of people. Abel wasn't sure what he could buy here, so he went to ask at the counter. From what he could see, this was kind of a more high-class version of a general store. There were daily commodities, jewelry, clothes, etc. He wasn't sure if he could find the stuff he was looking for here. "You must be Sir Abel," a fat, middle-aged man walked out from the counter. While wearing a big grin on his face, he greeted Abel with a bow. It was a weird bow, and the timing was pretty weird as well. Despite the unconventional and somewhat inappropriate display of etiquette shown towards him, Abel returned the favor with a formal greeting of his own. He knew how hard it was for commoners to learn the proper etiquette, so he wasn't going to ask too much here. Do you know me? Forgive me for calling out your name, sir. My name is Tim. I'm the owner of this establishment." Tim bowed again, but still in a very bizarre manner. "I've noticed the thorn shield on your attire. Your brother Zack had the same mark on him, and I happened to know him some time ago." The thorn shield was the coat of arms that represented the Bennett family. To be a competent royal, one must learn to memorize as many coats of arms as possible. It was a mandatory part of Abel's night training, along with literature, music, and other talents. "Do you have any single pieces of gemstone here, Mr. Tim?" Abel inquired. Now Abel didn't have to, but referring to Tim as Mr. was quite a respectful thing to do. Judging from Tim's reaction, he must have been extraordinarily pleased by this act of acknowledgement. "You've come to the right place, sir," Tim responded with a wider grin than when they had just met. "Yes, we provide a variety of gemstones here in Fort Lee." "What were you after, sir?" On his command, Tim ordered his men to unlock a big box stored in the counter. There were several rows of gemstones inside this box, all of which were very small pieces. Most people in Fort Lee couldn't afford jewelry. Plus, the bigger gemstones were to be moved to somewhere else. They had other uses than being sold off as luxury accessory items. "How much do I need to pay for these, Mr. Tim?" Abel asked as he picked up 6 evenly sized rubies from the box. "Just 6 gold coins, Sir Abel." It was a reasonable price. After all, no esteemed merchants would swindle a customer from the same region. Also, Abel might be young, but he was still the son of a knight. It was a fair deal made with 6 gold coins. Plain and simple. Having received the cash from Abel, Tim went to put 6 ruby pieces inside a woolen bag. He led Abel out of the store after that. In the most respectful way he knew, of course. Having left the shopping center, Abel ran off to an isolated alleyway. There, he took out 3 ruby pieces from the bag and placed them in his Horadric cube. If he remembered his formulas correctly, 3 of the same gemstones could merge into one bigger, finer gemstone of the same kind. Having withstood his feeling of excitement, Abel tapped the crafting spots with his finger. He inserted the 3 rubies in, which quickly vanished in a flash of light. He then saw a big ruby in the uppermost slot of the Horadric cube. What a thing of beauty this was! After putting it out in the daylight, every side of this piece was glistening with a clear, red flash. Whether it was the size or the quality of this piece, it was definitely a rank higher than the 3 other rubies combined. Abel couldn't tell for sure, but he knew this was worth more than 3 gold coins. Having crafted his second larger gemstone, Abel was starting to think of a good place to sell them. He knew he couldn't go back to Fort Lee Shopping Center for this. If he came back to sell them to the place he had just bought jewelry from, it wouldn't take a genius to figure out that something was wrong here. Abel walked around the town for a bit more. After walking down the main street, he could see that there was a boutique shop in front of him. It was Edmund's boutique shop, the biggest business of its kind in the entire duchy. From what Abel could remember, every town in the Duchy of Carmel had Edmund's boutique shop somewhere. It was a very renowned brand, with a history of 500 years since it was first founded. Every year, the Edmund business would host a big auction event that would attract aristocrats from all over the duchy. Even those from the neighboring duchies would come to bid on the exquisite items on sale. "Welcome to Edmund's boutique shop. How can I help you?" It was a young woman who greeted Abel as he made his entrance. She had blonde hair, a standard oval-shaped face, large eyes, and her skin was fair and spotless. The fine dress she was wearing was made of oriental silk, a material that originated from the Far East. She spoke in a soft, gentle voice as she gave Abel a noontime bow. "Good noon, young and beautiful madam," Abel greeted. "I'm looking for someone to verify a gemstone." Unlike that fat man earlier, this lady knew exactly the right way to demonstrate her etiquette. She spoke politely, but not in an unnecessarily wordy kind of way. Her bow was proper and well-timed. As mentioned before, it wasn't easy for most people to learn the proper etiquette. The Edmund business must have done quite an investment in training its employees. "Please call me Yvette, my young and handsome sir. You can talk to me if it's about verifying your gemstones. I'm the manager of this shop. Please come with me for a chat upstairs." Just from a first glance, Yvette could tell that Abel was someone of noble birth. This was precisely why she would have a talk with him herself. The two went upstairs to have a seat in the guest room. The moment Abel sat down, he was immediately served with a cup of fresh coffee. Abel didn't want to appear rude, but walking for several hours in town made him very thirsty. He went to have a sip before they even started talking. It was good coffee. Abel wasn't exactly an expert, but his tongue wasn't completely numb either. Wherever the beans were from, it wasn't something that the Bennett family could easily make a purchase of. Abel was a very young boy. So young, Yvette could just refer to him as boy. Age, however, was by no means what signified the reputation of a nobleman. This notion was commonly acknowledged among aristocrats, and it was also something that the servants followed by when they served. "How much is this gemstone worth, Madam Yvette?" Abel took out his bigger ruby and passed it to Yvette. Having taken over the gemstone, Yvette started examining its interior through a small lamp. Then, after a few minutes had passed, she raised her head with a somewhat delighted look on her face. "This is a perfect piece. The carvings, the structure of it, transparency. Honestly, I can't find any flaws in it. How about I buy it from you for 300 gold coins?" Abel knew how perfect his ruby was. His Horadric cube was literally incapable of crafting something flawed. It didn't matter if the gemstone was only worth 3 gold coins before. The price was now increased to 100 times worth of that. If someone else knew about Horadric cube, it would surely bring a lot of trouble to Abel. Edmund's boutique shop was a pretty trustworthy business brand. Plus, the price Yvette just offered was very pleasing from Abel's perspective, so he decided to take out the second gemstone from his bag. Abel passed over the ruby as he folded his bag in half, indicating that he only had 2 in total. "I have another one. Please, I will sell it at any price you offer." Red and passionate, Yvette exclaimed in a tone that could be heard from a noble. "Now there's 2 of them, and they're just as perfect as each other. I need some supplement for my knight's training. Is there anything you recommend?" Zack used supplements for his training every month. He liked to drink a special potion that would increase the flow of his chi before exercise. If Abel remembered correctly, the name of the potion was called a chi-condensing potion. He wasn't sure about it, though. No one bothered explaining it to a child like him. The Edmund's boutique shop can provide you with the lesser chi-condensing potion. It is priced at 10 gold coins per bottle. Yvette smiled, then paused for a sip of her coffee, telling you this may be bad for business. But there are a lot of unclean residues in the lesser potions and the side effects. Usually, if you take the potion for a month, you'd have to spend another month before your body can recover. "How effective is the lesser potion?" Abel asked. From his perspective, what mattered was that the potion could do what it was made to do. While Abel was a complete amateur in the use of potions, Yvette knew every detail there was to it. The best way to take the lesser potion is to have 5 bottles every month. With training course, the 5 bottles can essentially double your performance results, which means that a month's training will be the same as that of 2. After that, you'll have to take a month off before you can repeat the whole process all over again. If there is a lesser version of this potion, there must also be a greater version. Of course, if you take the greater potion, you'll only need to take 2 weeks off after every 5 bottles. 5 bottles of the greater potion are worth about 4 months of training. If you want something better, there is also what we call the greatest potion, and the monthly dosage can produce the same results as that of 5 months worth of training. You can take it without any break because of how pure it is, but they only come at 3 bottles per month for one person. Abel had his eyes wide open this entire time he was listening to the explanation. Yvette didn't want to appear rude, but the boy sitting across her was simply being way too cute. "Sorry for the inconvenience," Yvette chuckled, "but if you're looking for the chi-condensing pill, the best ones we have in this store are just the greater potions. We sell them at 50 gold coins per bottle. If you're looking for the greatest potion, you'll have to visit our main headquarters." Abel wasn't going to pay for a potion that was 50 gold coins per bottle. He wasn't even going to ask how much the greatest potions were. To his knowledge, there weren't a lot of rich people in Fort Lee. Most would have had to sell their homes to afford a bottle of the greater potion. Out of a mysterious affection for the boy in front of her, Yvette leaned in to share some secrets with Abel. "A lot of people don't know about this," Yvette softly whispered near Abel's ear. "According to the potion master in our main headquarters, if a novice knight decides to take the chi-condensing potion, it will actually be harder for him to advance his ways to become an official knight. It doesn't matter if the potion is lesser, greater, or greatest. The more you take these supplements, the more residues you will have inside your body, and that's going to counteract with your breakthrough process when you try to become an official knight. Abel didn't know why Yvette would be so kind to him, but he did realize how lucky he was to have her teach him so much about training with potions. All in the first meeting, too, so not only was he feeling very grateful, but he also began to develop more respect towards this very good-hearted girl. "Thank you for your reminder, Miss Yvette," Abel spoke in an even more formal tone. "What you just told me will be very crucial to me. If you don't mind answering to this, is there any potion that doesn't produce a side effect?" "Why, there is, of course," Yvette nodded her head, "sometimes when they are in the mood for it. The potion masters would make something called the Master's Chi Condensing Potion. There is no guarantee on the number of these Master's Potions, but one potion master is said to be able to produce 10 bottles of it every single year. Once the potions are ready, they are either given off as gifts for friends and families, or they're bought off by the rich and powerful." Yvette continued in an admiring and proud tone. "In our annual auction event, our own potion master would put up 5 bottles of the Master's Chi Condensing Potion for sale. They're priced at more than 1,000 gold coins per bottle, and one bottle is enough for a novice knight to skip an entire year of training." If he didn't have his own Horadric cube, Abel would have never considered taking potions for his training. Based on his previous performances, his talent looked more promising than both his father and brother. He was a genius, and it didn't matter if he was only 12 years old. With enough time and effort, he could easily become an official knight. Still, the idea of using a Master's Chi Condensing Potion sounded very attractive to Abel. A year worth of training without any side effects, and all it would take was some money. It was the perfect job, his Horadric cube. Having come to a decision, Abel raised his head to make his purchase. "I'll take 54 bottles of the lesser Chi Condensing Potion. Actually, with the money that's left, can I also get a small crossbow? Maybe something I can hold with just one hand." Abel knew how dangerous this world was. He could be ambushed by a starving beast just by walking on an open path. It was true that he was smart enough to kill that shadow panther back then, but it was best not to rely on luck in every single fight. That being said, it was always good to carry some gears with him while going to places. Abel wanted a sword and some armors, too, but his budget was way too low for that. Actually, even if he had more money with him, he probably still wouldn't use it here. He was nowhere good enough to hide his own secrets, his cube, yet. If he was going to spend money on equipment, he'd like it to be something that people couldn't see. By this logic, a small crossbow seemed like a decent option. Just like that dagger Zack gave him, Abel could easily hide a weapon like this somewhere on him. Come to think of it, it would be nice to be able to perform sneak attacks both within close range and long range. How about this small crossbow? It was crafted by the dwarves. Yvette went and placed a grey crossbow on the table, along with the potions Abel had ordered. Abel tried lifting the crossbow with just one arm. It was a very delicate piece of work, with a little less than a kilogram in weight. He didn't quite like its appearance, though, since every part of it was just painted in plain grey. Besides, there were some very ugly holes that were punched through the handle. "This is a second-hand item," Yvette explained in a bemused way as Abel had a very questionable look on his face. "I know what you are thinking. But the dwarves did a pretty good job when they first crafted this. Usually, a brand new crossbow with this kind of craftsmanship would have cost more than 500 gold coins. There were supposed to be some gems on the handle, but someone else decided to chip them off to make extra profit. Besides, no one liked this color. No wonder it would be in the store for this long." "I'll take it," Abel stated. He knew Yvette was being good to him. He wasn't sure why she was willing to go so far to help him, but he knew she wasn't the type to lie. "Be careful when you take these lesser potions. You have a long road ahead of you, Yvette said as she placed the chi condensing potion in a box. She also grabbed some ammunition for Abel's crossbow. Thank you, Miss Yvette. I'll make sure that I take these potions with caution, Abel responded with sincerity. He wanted to appear reliable in front of Yvette. Once Abel had gotten out of the store, he had 54 bottles of the lesser chi condensing pill, 1 small crossbow, and 5 crossbow arrows. Yvette, on the other hand, was sitting next to the window on the boutique shop's second floor. While watching as Abel slowly made his way back, she couldn't help but think about her little brother who had left the family for 2 years by now. If she could see him now, he would probably be just as big as Abel. It was quite late when Abel caught up with Norman. The sun was slightly leaned towards the west by the time they saw each other. If they didn't go back to the Bennett castle right away, they would have had to travel during the night, which was not safe at all. Norman saw the box Abel was holding, but he didn't say anything about it. As far as he was concerned, what mattered wasn't how much money his young master had spent or what he had bought. He was a bodyguard, and the only thing he cared about was his master's safety. That being the case, Abel still didn't want to let anyone see his box. He was going to put it in his Horadric cube before, but there were far too few spots for him to put in his chi condensing pill. It was 1 bottle per slot, so the most he could store was 10. He needed 2 more for his Tome of Town portal, meaning that the only way to go was to carry most of the stuff with his own hands. Fortunately, the 2 got back without facing any danger on the way, and Abel picked the right time to arrive at home. Zack was just practicing horse riding with the Knight of Bennett. No one, not his father, his mother, or his brother, no one was going to ask him what he had bought in town. This was a family of royals. They respected each other as royals. Every member, regardless of age, had rights to his or her own privacy. Abel was loved by his parents, but the love he felt was very different from the one he experienced on Earth. During his life back on Earth, parents showed love by interfering with every aspect of the child's life. They had to have a say in the child's education, social life, romantic life, marriage, and anything else. Any secret that a child had was considered a violation of the trust between them. The rules were very different here. Every time there was an important choice to make, Abel's parents would always listen to what Abel wanted, no matter how drastic the consequences were. As the second son of the family, the path ahead of Abel would be nothing but harsh for him. Now, the Knight of Bennett knew this. He knew this all too well, but he decided to agree with his love for his son. It was a different kind of love, different from the kind that Abel experienced from his previous parents. They were equal in their way, however. Abel knew that, and he was grateful to be so blessed in his 2 very long lifetimes. After coming back to his room, Abel quickly opened his box and took out a bottle of the chi condensing potion. Whilst facing the sunset, he could see that the bottle was surrounded by arcs of white light which, in ways that were inapplicable to normal physics, kept on flashing and sparking as they swirled around. It was only a lesser potion, yes, but by appearance alone, it would be worth so much if it was found on Earth. Speaking of Earth, Abel missed his home now. He never had a nostalgia for the whole year that he came here, but something kicked in when he saw the Tome of Portal yesterday. Whatever, just don't think about it, he forced himself. Right now, the important thing was his experiment. If Abel's hypothesis was confirmed, his training speed would be much faster than where it was currently. Abel inserted 3 lesser potions into the Horadric cube, then lightly pressed onto the transmute button. After a white light flashed by, the 3 bottles of the chi condensing potion emerged into just 1. It was not surrounded by white arcs of light, however, but a beautiful ray of blue. It worked. Abel had never seen a greater chi condensing potion before, but this should be it. There was no doubt about it. The Horadric cube never got its formulas wrong. It wasn't like he cared too much about it, but a smirk suddenly emerged on Abel's face. If 3 bottles of the lesser potion cost 30 gold coins in total, and a bottle of the greater potion costs 50 gold coins, he just made 20 coins worth of profit. It was a weird thought to have in a serious time like this, but it was kind of funny in a way. Abel inserted 3 more lesser potions into his cube. For reasons he himself wasn't sure of, he was already feeling like a potion master or an alchemist figuring out the right proportions for his concoction. As excited as he was, Abel's hands never stopped. He just kept on transmuting the lesser potions into greater potions, then lined up the finished products on his table. Pretty soon, 54 bottles of the lesser chi condensing potions were turned into 18 bottles of the greater chi condensing potion. Abel was about to scream at this point. Even if he couldn't turn the greater potions into the greatest potion, he was pretty much guaranteed a way to afford his living now. If he wanted to, he could head into the potion brewing business at any time he wanted. He could become a renowned potion master by selling large quantities of the greater chi condensing potion. Becoming a knight was his topmost preference, of course, but it was always good to have some sort of backup plan. Abel calmed himself once more. Then, he inserted 3 bottles of the greater potion into his Horadric cube. Without any failure this time, the 3 greater potions were mixed into one. It was a bottle surrounded with golden arcs of light. Inside was a potion that could only be produced by an expert. It was the greatest potion which, although makeable given the right amount of experience, was not something that could be sold as a regular item. The greatest potion was inferior to a master's potion, but the creation of both required the brewer to be in the right zone. There was something special about this potion. Abel didn't know how much it was worth exactly, but his guess was just as good as anybody else's. Well, there wasn't a lot of potion masters in the duchy, he knew at least that much. Soon, 18 greater potions were turned into 6 bottles of greatest potions. Abel was right. It was the right choice for him to spend all his money on potions. He put the 3 bottles of the greatest potion into the cube, and just like all the times before, everything in the slots vanished when a white light flashed out. What came out was a bottle of a master's chi condensing potion. It was surrounded by arcs of dark golden light, and there was a thick texture to the liquid that was inside. The liquid itself was amber in color. Strangely, though, it was not translucent like all the other potions. With a gentle shake of its container, Abel would see that it was a little bit sticky. One more time. At the end of the day, Abel produced 2 bottles of the master's chi condensing potion. He produced 2 bottles of the ultimate potion, which would bear no effects whatsoever to its user. Now, what should he do about these potions? He could consume it right here, but that would expose the existence of the Horadric cube. He couldn't allow that to happen if he was to survive in this world. The better option was to store it somewhere safe. Whatever Abel was planning to do next, safety always came first. The more Abel knew about this world, the less safe he began to feel. While everything could be explained by science on Earth, the logic seemed to work very differently here. The injury on Norman's leg should take a few months to recover, but a lesser divine act was enough to treat it on the spot. Knowing something like this was actually more worrisome than relieving, the more you think about it. With that in mind, if Fort Lee was just a small town, what kind of unexplainable, unthinkable things could Abel see if he went to a bigger town? A bigger city, maybe. The Bennett Castle always held its dinner on time. Since there were knights in the house, the time to eat was set at 8 o'clock at night. The meal, as always, was limited to 3 things: beef, porridge, and mashed potatoes. Due to financial issues, the beef was not flavored with anything at all. Spices were restricted to only the very rich nobles. They had to be harvested all the way from the Double Moon Forest, which was a faraway territory ruled by the elves. The further a product was from its place of origin, the pricier it was. This was especially true when there were so many merchants involved in the transportation process. Like always, it was a quiet, yet heartwarming dinner with the family. After a whole day of workout, combat, and adventure, Abel wanted to go back to his room for a shower. He didn't like the sewage system here, though, so he decided to make one himself. The Bennett castle relied on one underground stream for its water supply. Like most castles built in this world, no resource could be sent in the fort if it was surrounded by invaders, so the water was crucial for self-subsistence. If it was a castle built for a high lord, the sewage system would probably be big enough for a few thousand people. The Bennett castle could provide enough water for a few hundred people, which was quite a lot in itself. There were less than 100 residents living here, guards and servants included, so the water was not an issue at all. To build his own irrigation system, Abel decided to find the carpenter of the Bennett castle. He ordered the carpenter to build a water wheel. It was meant to be powered by the underground stream, and there would be some pipes connected to it to let the water flow inside a big wooden box, which would be stored on the top floor of the castle. Then, using some bamboo hardened with fire, pipes were built to let the water into the bathroom. Abel had bronze in mind at the start, but metal was far too expensive. There was no mine inside the castle. No blacksmith for hire either. The Bennett family couldn't even use iron to make the pipes. After a long, hard thought to himself, Abel came to the conclusion that bamboo was the best option available. Once heated up with fire, it could be bent, hardened and used for a variety of construction work. Most importantly, it was extremely cheap. After the pipes were ready, Abel had the carpenter make him a full-size wooden bathtub, a wooden washing basin, and even a flush toilet with seat. For once, things were starting to look a bit modern. Lumber was worth almost nothing in this world. Apart from some of very rare species, anyone with an axe could get some wood from the forest. Speaking of which, the Bennett family owned all the trees within a 100-mile radius from the castle. Lumberjacks and carpenters were hired, of course, but the main job was with planting crops in the field. You wouldn't get paid much for chopping down trees. Thanks to Abel's innovative suggestions, every room of the castle was renovated with the same design plan. The carpenter, after being paid a generous sum for his work, was ordered to sign a contract with the Knight of Bennett. Without his master's permission, he was restricted from making the same system again for anyone else. Hence, the blueprint of the wooden irrigation system was locked inside the Bennett family vault. As a nobleman who grew up knowing a fair share of things, the Knight of Bennett knew how life-threatening this device could be. If some high lord happened to know about it, he would most likely keep it all in his own family collection, meanwhile killing anyone who happened to know something about it. The Knight of Bennett was all too familiar with this sort of thing, which was why Abel didn't invent anything afterward. Without the right status and strength, any creative ideas could bring catastrophe to him and his family. For the thousands of years of this world's history, there had been no change to the way society was structured. It was a very different story to that of Earth, which was very easily influenced by instability and interferences. Rules could vanish and re-emerge within a span of a few centuries, and nothing could ever be referred to as constant. Abel, come stay with Zack, the Knight of Bennett commanded as Abel was about to head back to his room. You are a rank 1 novice knight now. You are now worthy of my tutoring. After coming to the training room, Abel could see that the servants had already prepared the wooden dummies for him. There were some wooden swords hanging on the wall, and the Knight of Bennett grabbed one to give it to him. I have heard about what you did. The Knight of Bennett stared at Abel. You killed a shadow panther with the strength of a beginner knight. You surprised me, son. Even if you did it with Norman's help, I am still very surprised about it. For my whole life, I have seen countless knights with a more talented than I could ever be. They were stronger than me, faster than me, but none of them lived to be as old as I am now. Do you know why? Abel, surprised, the Knight of Bennett was suddenly giving him a lecture. For all the time he had been in this world, he had never heard so much word coming out his father's mouth before. How did I survive to be standing here today? It's because a knight's strongest shield is his sword. The fastest sword is also the sturdiest shield there is. If the knight is fast, he can charge when he's on a horse. When he gets down the horse, he can pull on a heavy bow with a blink of an eye. Now, there are a lot of geniuses in this world. Some of them decided to become the fastest men they could be. Some of them decided to become the strongest men they could be. Now, I'm not the strongest man there is. I'm also not the fastest man there is. However, I happen to be the heir of our family, and what our ancestors have left for us is a full training routine dedicated to knights. Because of my heritage, I became the strongest man among the fastest man, and I became the fastest man among the strongest men. The Knight of Bennett widened his eyes, called out in a rather emotional tone, what our ancestors gave us is the most complete system there is. Generation after generation, they passed it on to me without making any sort of adjustment. In the near future, I will fulfill my role and pass this treasure on to you both. Remember this: no gold, no renowned weapon, or armor, none of these will be ever as precious as heritage. Heritage, my sons, heritage is the most precious treasure there is. Zack, show your brother how to form an attack. The Knight of Bennett threw a wooden word towards Zack, to which Zack responded with a glare of a beast. He pointed towards the dummy with his sword, drew a light breath from his mouth, and instantly changed into his charging position. Abel could just barely see it. The dummy was sent flying in an instant. And while it was still in midair, Zack quickly went to stab it at 3 different spots. It was the thigh, the waist, and the throat, all executed in one sequence of movement. It was like something coming straight out of a textbook. "You are faster than this," the Knight of Bennett said. The father was always strict in his demands. Zack understood that, so he quickly responded with a nod. "Can you see this clearly, Abel? This is a classic knight's attack. You break through your enemy's defense with a charge and finish the fight with a quick slash to their vital spot. Every part of this sequence takes thousands of years to refine. Your role is to execute these movements as perfectly as you can. There is no need to make any kind of adjustment. Countless blood has been spilled to come up with what you are looking at right now." The Knight of Bennett continued with a slightly ridiculing tone. "There are always some so-called geniuses who try to be creative with this. None of them are alive now. Listen here, son. What you should be doing is to remember these movements. Turn them into your instincts. Use them before you have any second thoughts." Abel felt so proud to have killed that shadow panther back then, but looking at Zack was a real wake-up call for him. He could be as smart as he wanted to be with his tricks, but they would always be futile against a properly trained knight. Even Zack could dominate him without any resistance. For the remaining days, Abel continued on his training routine. He practiced combat techniques during the daytime and improved his muscle strength with the metal armor at night. Before he went to bed, he would always practice his night breathing techniques. There was a lot more beef on the dinner table that night. For that point onward, Abel was starting to receive the same meal size as Zack. While the Knight of Bennett hadn't said anything about it, he felt like his father had come to some sort of decision. Being a gym trainer probably had something to do with this. For reasons he wasn't sure of, Abel learned how to fight as knight fairly quickly. He had good reflexes and forms. What he lacked in experience and strength, he would certainly make up for as he got older. The Bennett family system taught the use of multiple types of weapons. There was archery, lancing, sword and shield play, heavy shield, etc. After about half a year of non-stop training, Abel learned all there was to learn. It was kind of unfair for Zack, in a way, so much so that he had often made complaints to the spirits. But that took me more a year. He would often cry out, and the Knight of Bennett would always wear an ominous look on his face. Abel wasn't sure what his father was thinking of, but he knew something was about to happen soon. Over these past few months, Abel did not take a single drop of his master's potion. After learning about the importance of heritage from his father, he decided that it was only right to take supplements after he knew all the right techniques. Still, in a very short period of time, he managed to become a rank 2 novice knight with just his raw talent. On one particular night, Abel knew something was wrong when he sat down for dinner. He noticed how red and swollen Nora's eyes were. He also saw a very resolute expression on his father's face. "Abel, my son," the Knight of Bennett stood up as Abel had just picked up his fork. "You are the most talented child I have seen in all of my life. The Holy Light has granted you wisdom and courage, but the Bennett family does not have the resources to raise you to your full potential. This is a great loss to the family name and a disgrace to one who guides us all." The Knight of Bennett threw a glance at his wife, then back to his 2 sons. He continued on in a coarser voice, "I have made an agreement with a fellow knight of mine. His name is Marshall. For the next few years, Abel will train to be a knight under his teaching. If Abel manages to meet his expectations, he will be inheriting the unicorn symbol, which is the coat of arms of the Harry family." Abel knew who the Knight of Marshall was. The Knight of Marshall was his father's best friend. They fought alongside each other during the war against the Orcs. During the most desperate times, they saved each other's life and came back home together. Unlike the Knight of Bennett, the Knight of Marshall never had a child. His only wife died in an incident, and he was never married after that. For all the years that the Marshall family had been without an heir, he just kept on staying in the castle where his wife was buried. It was no easy choice from the Knight of Bennett to send Abel away. Abel wasn't just going to have his surname changed. As a matter of fact, he was going to cut his ties with his real family. He would be wearing a different coat of arms on his clothes, his armor, and his flag. That's probably how it was going to be for the rest of his life. Having a talented child was a very troubling thing for the Knight of Bennett. He had thought all kinds of different options before, including sending him to his wife's father, Keith. Still, it had been a long time since he last contacted Keith. Besides, Keith was a merchant. He had money, yes, but simply having money was not enough to raise someone to be a knight. Also, Keith lived all the way up at Horadric, which made it very hard to keep in touch with Abel if he was sent over there. Seth Bennett, that was the real name of the Knight of Bennett. He was commonly referred with the Bennett title because, well, he was the only one of his kind living on this plane. 2 centuries ago, his ancestors became royals because of the contributions to the war. They were also rewarded with a piece of land. Its name was originally the Bennett Honorary Lord's Domain, but now it was just the Bennett Knight's Domain. The direct descendants of the Bennett family lived in Bakong City, which was a major city located inside Horadric. If Abel was sent there, it was very likely for him to become a regular knight. There was a trade-off for doing so, however. It would mean that Abel would become a bodyguard for a direct descendant of the Bennett family. He would have to sacrifice his own personal freedom, and if the circumstances called for it, his own life. There was no way the Knight of Bennett would let that happen to his second son. There was another reason: the Knight of Bennett wouldn't want Abel to lose the status of a royalty. It was something that he had already decided, long before Abel was even born. As the proud Knight of Bennett, he would only make a request from his kinsmen if the Bennett Knight's Domain were to regain its old title as the territory of an honorary lord. It was a crucial way of him maintaining his pride, so to speak. Marshal Harry was a different man to the Knight of Bennett. First of all, his family had a very prestigious name in Bakong City. With the help of his family, Marshal Harry was also rewarded with a knight's domain after a war. It was land just 300 miles away from the Bennett Knight's domain, mainly because of his ties with the Knight of Bennett. Everything there was newly built, apparently. Even the castle was made of new bricks and stones. The Harry family had a long and fine history to it. A few elite knights came to be because of them. And while the philosophy was different from that of the Bennett family, the two had great respect for each other's achievements in the past. Marshal Harry had always wanted to adopt a son. He had said it on many occasions, but it was hard to find someone with the right conditions. He wasn't just looking for a child that he could look after. He was looking for an heir that he could pass his family name on to. That being said, the child he would adopt must have royal blood inside of him. Ironically, though, most royal children already had the futures planned ahead of them. Suppose a man had 3 sons. Even if the eldest was to become the heir, it was very easy for him to disqualify after, say, a lost jewel or a common disease. Whatever might take away his life, the next child would always be a backup solution. And there really wasn't a royal family with just one child. Everyone wanted more kids. The only problem, really, was with how much wealth was distributed to educate them. Abel was a genius. The Knight of Bennett was very certain of that. He knew how talented Abel was, and there was no way he would let that talent go to waste. Yes, even if such a decision comes with a cost. Sending Abel away was a great loss to the Bennett family. All because there wasn't enough money in the family. No wonder everyone was so grim during dinner. Zack kept having his beef sliding out of his fork, which was an act that would usually receive the immediate condemnation from the Knight of Bennett. Strangely, however, the Knight of Bennett just kept on eating his food in silence. Nora was the only one who didn't hide away her emotions. She barely ate anything during dinner time, and instead spent of her time sobbing and wiping away her tears. After dinner was over, the Knight of Bennett had Abel come to his study for a chat. As the place for storing some of the family's most important documents, the study was usually locked up for anyone except the Knight of Bennett himself. That being said, it was the first time that Abel had laid his eyes on it. Just by first glance, Abel could tell that it was a very big room. On one side of the white wall, there were portraits of previous owners of the Bennett castle. The other side was stuffed with tall bookshelves, which contained various sizes of red or black books. In the middle of the study was a big wooden desk. From what Abel could see, it had a very smooth surface to it, which was most likely due to the years of paperwork that was signed on top of it. This was, in other words, the core of Bennett's Knight domain. All commands, big or small, were officialized at this very spot right here. The Knight of Bennett walked over towards the desk. He dragged out a big box made of oak wood. It was a fancy box, laced with deer hides and had a red bronze handle on top of it. As the Knight of Bennett opened it, Abel could see a tidy set of armor inside. A half-body cuir buoy. Both the front and back were decorated with small, shiny square pieces of metal. From the shoulder to the wrist were multiple layers of galvanized iron. This was quite an unusual set of armor, which was a mix between a leather set and a metal set. Not only was it cheaper than a full steel gear or chainmail, but it was also more resistant than something purely made of animal skins. I got this cuir buoy during my battle against the orcs. After I killed an inferno bovine, I carried its corpse to an armorsmith and had him craft an armor set from it, said the Knight of Bennett as he took out the lower half of the armor from the box. It was a pair of leather jeans with galvanized iron as the knee guard. Here is a light longsword, a pair of leather boots and a pair of gloves. I don't have a lot of previous things to give you, my child. Abel's eyes were starting to swell it. He noticed this armor set now. It was his father's backup set. As it was impossible for a knight to possess only one set of armor, he had to have a backup to wear when the original was sent for maintenance. If the original set was elsewhere, the Knight of Bennett would have to fight without protection. But there was no hesitation, no refusal either. As Abel took over the box, he was starting to feel the weight of a father's love. There was no other gift that could be as precious as this. After Abel came back to his room, he saw that his mother had already been waiting for him. Unlike the Knight of Bennett, her parting gifts were much simpler. There were jackets, shirts, a training suit, formal suits, and several pieces of handkerchiefs. It was clothing, more clothing and nothing else. Nora didn't cry this time. She just held onto Abel's hand and talked to him. She spoke slowly and patiently. It was mostly about how Abel should get along with others once he was in the outside world. The night was quiet, but the Bennett castle remained alight. Nobody had slept. It was until dawn when Nora had left Abel's room. After his mother was gone, Abel sat quietly on a chair and contemplated his life over the last 2 years. Despite his appearance, Abel was a 40-year-old man on the inside. It wasn't like he didn't know what the Knight of Bennett was thinking. He agreed very much with the decision that was made for him. If he wasn't so gifted at such an early age, everything could have been normal for him. Instead of leaving to an unknown place at an age as early as 12, he could have left the family when he reached adulthood. Abel saw what was coming for him, and he was ready to take it. He took out his Horadric tube, revealed a bottle of the golden chi condensing pill, and opened its cap. He wanted to save it for later, but the challenge ahead would not let him delay. Not long ago, the Bennett castle was a safeguard that protected Abel's safety. Without it, he had learned to protect himself with whatever he could lay his hands on. As the amber-colored liquid slid inside his throat, Abel could feel his inside filled with a vigorous essence. The chi kept on channeling through his muscles, but unlike most regular potions, it did not take away any of the food that he had eaten before. It quickly materialized and was turned into his third meridian. It was doing this at a very steady pace, too. Unlike most times when he had tried to do it on his own, Abel didn't have to worry if the process was going to fail. Abel practiced his breathing techniques every night, but he was never so successful as he was now. On a regular night, he could do 20 sets at most. He would have to take breaks between each one of them. Things were very different tonight. He was going very strong. Even the curtains were moving at the rhythm of his breathing. It took about half an hour for the potion to wear off. By this time, there were 3 stabilized meridians inside Abel's body and some excess chi which could have filled in half more. Abel was surprised about this, of course. As it turned, the Master's potion was much more powerful than what Yvette had told him. Were the rumors wrong, then? Well, not exactly. Technically speaking, a Master's potion was still far from being a perfect potion. As skilled as a potion master might be, human craftsmanship still had its limitations. The Horadric cube was free from such a flaw, though. Since Abel was crafting his chi-condensing potion mechanically, every little detail, proportions and such were all taken into consideration and was in respect to the power of the rule. This was, to put it simply, was a force that belonged to the gods. As a divine item, the Horadric could utilize a fraction of this power to transform whatever item that it contained. This was the reason why the Master's potion Abel created was much more potent than our regular one. It was like asking a god to help with a novice knight's training, and what kind of god would be so bored to do that? It was hard to resist the temptation once it started to kick in. After leveling himself up in just half an hour, Abel decided to take in another bottle of his Master's potion. And there it was again. In virtually no time whatsoever, chi quickly emerged and became Abel's 4th meridian. The effect of the potion quickly vanished after it had done its job. Abel quickly stood up from the ground. He noticed that his entire body was covered in dark, stinky stains. After enhancing his bodily function in such a short period of time, all the dirty substances inside of him were quickly excreted out. Abel quickly ran to the bathroom to clean himself up. Having used 3 bucketfuls of water, he tried as hard as he could to scrub away the stench off him. After he was done, he opened up his room's window and tried to let the wind take the smell away. Abel was half naked while he was doing this. He had grown 10 centimeters over the past 6 months, putting him at 160 centimeters in height. He was just a kid, but the muscles on him were already pronounced. As buff as he was, Abel was still very humble. He had great respect for the fighters in this world. Whether it was a mercenary or a knight, anyone with a weapon could pull off a very impressive fight. That being said, though, most of them wouldn't know how to fight properly with their own bodies. If 2 men were to fight against each other with nothing but the bare fists, they would simply throw straight punches at each other and watch who went down first. As a former gym trainer, Abel was acquainted with the use of several types of martial arts. He knew boxing, MMA, Muay Thai, and Tai Chi. He wasn't an expert, so to speak, but the knowledge he possessed has made him a very formidable opponent in any type of hand-to-hand combat. If it was hand-to-hand combat, Abel could easily defeat Zack, who was obviously much taller and stronger than him. Strength wasn't everything, so they said. With the power of sports science on his side, everyone in this world seemed clumsy Abel when they fought with nothing but the bare fists. And very rightly so. In this world, there was hardly any need to develop any hand-to-hand combat system. The humans' biggest foes were the orcs. Brawling with those monsters head-on was just suicide. What about against other humans, then? Well, royals solved the disagreements with sword duels. Fighting with no weapon was considered foul and in some way very disrespectful to one's opponent. As Abel practiced a few reps of his standard punches, he could felt a significant increase in his power and speed. It was good and all, but such an improvement was kind of hard to get used to. Just when he was grabbing his wooden cup for a sip of water, his fingers snapped it into shreds. Too much progress could have the downturns, so it seemed. But that was fine. Abel was 12 years old now, with only 1 month left before his 13th birthday. By that time, he would have already made the same achievement as Zack did when he was 18. Abel readied himself for his Tai Chi practice. While he was repeating the moves that were taught to him, he tried to remember what his instructors used to say. From what he could remember, the instructor said that Tai Chi was the best martial art for holding back one's brute force. Tai Chi was about reserving one's power, moving in an unending sequence of movements. Being able to both escalate and de-escalate at the same time and having a natural rhythm while fulfilling all these conditions. It was about harmonizing one's entire being into a collected whole, which was much easier said than done. Abel had to calm himself down after taking that second potion. After stabilizing himself from a state of excitement, he began to act out all 74 postures of his Tai Chi sequence. It was the beginning posture, the Vajra pounds mortar, grasp and tuck clothes, all the way until the 74th posture. The sun was very much up high after he was finally done. As it turned out, Tai Chi didn't make you have a weaker punch. It just made you appear weaker than you were. With his Tai Chi techniques activated, Abel noticed that he was much weaker than he truly was when he was looking at himself in the mirror. If he was to tone down his Tai Chi, he was a rank 4 novice knight. But if he was to activate it, he could appear in whatever rank which he so desired. He could not pretend to be at the level that was higher than what he was actually at. This was very convenient. It was hard to make up a reason to explain why he had ranked up for 2 in just a single night, but having a camouflage meant that there was no need in doing so. Abel could just keep putting himself at rank 2 while he was packing up his luggage. It was a cold morning at the start of December. As things were starting to get busy for the Bennett castle, the servants had to start cleaning the stables right after they woke up. The stablemen fed beans to the 2 chariot horses. The cleaners brushed all the swords, armors and boots inside the house. There was even a new rein for the Knight of Bennett's steed. While Abel and his servants came out with the luggage, 6 lancers were waiting for him in front of the castle gate. While not necessarily grand in any way, they were standing very neatly around a line of chariots. It was a small farewell parade designated for the young master's leave. These men were all wearing blue leather armor. They had boots as high as their knees and wore blue woolen hats on top of their heads. Apart from their 3-meter-long lances, everything they had on them was sewn inside the Bennett castle. While the wool might not be protective against arrows, they did make it easier to pull one out of a soldier's wound. There weren't many decorations in the parade. Apart from the 2 soldiers hanging up the thorn shield flag on the tip of their lances, there wasn't anything that stood out in particular. Since blue was the base color of the Bennett family's coat of arms, every fabric in this parade, costumes and curtains and so on, all had to have the same uniform tone. Just while Abel was carrying the box onto his chariot, the Knight of Bennett rode his battle steed outside of the castle gate. Behind him was Abel's mother, Nora, who had eyes full of tears as Zack held her. The Knight of Bennett was looking especially solemn. Under the bright shine of the sun, every plate of his silver-white armor was glowing in shivering light. He wasn't wearing his helmet for some reason. His helmet and weapons were all hanging on one side of his saddle. His long hair was tied up in a simple tail, which kept moving around as the cold wind went by. Nora didn't say anything to Abel. She just kept looking at Abel, almost as if she had already told him everything last night. It was like she was looking at the most precious treasure in the world. One way or another, Zack always knew that Abel was going to leave the castle. It was a tradition that no one could go against, which was why he was always so loving towards his only brother. He didn't expect Abel to leave so early, though. "This is your home, Abel. Come back when you have the time to." Zack came to hug his little brother. Technically speaking, Abel was just as strong as him, but the grasp was so tight that it felt more overwhelming than intended. Abel was quite calm this whole day, but he felt like he was going to lose it at this moment. The morning sun didn't feel quite warm during winter. And, because of how loud the wind was howling, every flag in the parade was waving around like they were out of control. Abel didn't sit inside the chariot cabin. Instead, he was riding on top of a 3-year-old mare right in the middle of the parade. Because of how oversized his father's Kyobuili was, he was now wearing a leather armor covered in wool. He was carrying a light sword on his back. So light, in fact, that it felt almost useless for a rank 4 novice knight. Abel turned around for a final look at his mother and brother. He couldn't do it for too long, however. The moment he turned his head around, he felt like tears were immediately welling up his eyes. Since the head court couldn't be unguarded, not a lot of people joined the farewell parade. Apart from Abel and the Knight of Bennett, there were about 9 people in total who left the Bennett castle. As the second best fighter in the Bennett Knights' domain, Norman was left with the task of being the Bennett castle's temporary headmaster. Knights were the lowest amongst royalty. That being said, not just anyone could be qualified to serve them. Loyalty, reliability, competence in combat, and being of noble birth were all crucial features to being qualified as a knight's underlings. Take Norman, for example. He had been a brother of the Knight of Bennett ever since the war. He was only granted the status of a knight after he had his loyalty confirmed, and was taught the Bennett family's secret techniques at a much later time. It was a rewarding journey for him, to say the least. For the years of his devotion, he was promoted from a regular guard to being the honored underling of a noble knight. Many wandering knights were desperate for a master with his own territory. Once accepted, the head knight would be responsible for all the day-to-day expenses. This included weapons, armors, and even the housing of the underlings. With this much at stake, one had to be extra careful in choosing his most trusted underlings. The parade went on for a total of 6 hours. Apart from the half-hour break during lunchtime, the men didn't stop the feat at one single time. Thankfully, no one was bold enough to be a disturbance. Even the beasts could tell how dangerous the Knight of Bennett was. This was the furthest Abel had been from home. He could vaguely recall the 11 years of the real Abel's childhood, and it was truly his very first time to be this far away from home. Sadly, though, there wasn't much scenery to lay his eyes on. Apart from some evergreen plants lying on the side of the road, everything just looked kind of gloomy and dull around here. Thank the spirit that it wasn't snowing. As dusty as the soil road might be, it was a much more preferable choice than trekking on wet, mushy ground. From what Abel had heard from others, roads in the big cities were all paved in large, smooth stones. For some reason, it kept reminding him of the concrete roads he had remembered from planet Earth. How nice would it be if there were concrete roads in this world? Abel was about to extend on his imagination, but he also remembered his oath to not make any inventions. Like the irrigation system he had built for the Bennett Castle, creativity without protection would only bring disaster to him and those around him. As a grown man who had received modern education behind everybody's back, Abel could think faster than the real Abel could. He was also smarter than the version of himself on Earth. Whether it was fighting, etiquette, or anything culturally related, he could pretty much understand in a snap of a finger. It was almost as if he had received a buff when he arrived in this world. After a while, the roads were going from soil to Portuguese pavements. The Knight of Bennett wasn't surprised at it. If anything, he knew exactly why this was the case. This is what makes the Martial Knight special, the Knight of Bennett said to Abel as he pointed to the ground below. He's all about not losing face in front of others. If there was a mountain to mine around here, he would have used giant boulders to pave the roads here. While staring at his father's shiny armor, the newly sewn decorations on his horses, and the brand new gears of the 6 accompanying lances, Abel really felt like saying, "Father, if you were just a little bit richer, I'm sure that Martial Knight would have nothing on you if it's about losing faces."